Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to take a look at the Launchi Monster 76. Featuring Launchi branded 1104 8000 kV motors, F3 flight controller with an OSD, 10 amp ESC, 700 TV line CMOS camera with the 48 channel VTX. It comes with 1630 props. It does appear to be slightly over 76 millimeters. Bottom plate is 2 millimeters. Camera mounting plate is 1 millimeter. Side plates are 1.5 millimeters. It weighs 51.8 grams. It does come with LEDs. This is where the buzzer should be. Uses a JST 24 gauge wire. It also comes with a nondescript 500 milliamp 20C battery, 2 extra sets of props, and an Allen key, a USB battery charger, a 1-page information sheet, and a pretty nice box. Okay, let's start with the bad news. 20C battery isn't going to cut it on this. You're going to get brownouts. In my case, I had receiver brownouts, and so I would just fall to the earth. And 20C 500 milliamp on this little guy isn't going to get you much flight time either. Even with my good batteries, the flight times are fairly short. The props, as you can tell, I replaced them right out the box. I don't know who makes these props or where they come from, but there are other versions available. I believe Rotor Geeks has a version that might work out. I had some King Kong props, and so I just cut some down to make this little guy work. But with this, you'd get wobbles, like yaw wobbles. It was pretty strange, and hopefully you're looking at it up here. So if you do get this, the first thing you want to do is throw these props out. I know Andy RC had some issues with his quality control because I got the plug-and-play version, so I had to install my own receiver. I didn't have those issues. Everything kind of came as you see in front of you, with one exception. You'll see I added some hot glue to the camera. They did use some foam down here to try to help secure it, but the camera would still wobble back and forth, so you could get some wobbles out of that as well. And at first I thought maybe my glue had not held. When I came back in and took another look, the glue was fine. It was just the machine was wobbling around, and as you picked up speed, it wouldn't wobble as much. So, you know, you might not notice it with those props, but I wouldn't try tuning with those props. Whenever a prop introduces vibrations or wobbles, it's going to make tuning a bit difficult. And I'll go ahead and overlay the PIDs I ended up with on the screen. I think in short, they've got some pretty good engineering ideas going on here. I think this is a case of over-motored and under-propped, and our props are limited. You can see there we have a tiny bit of clearance, but you know, if you get any prop flex, if you go into that recess right up next to the nylon standoff to try to get yourself a little bigger prop, you're probably going to end up with issues and knocking into these pieces one way or another. But we could save ourselves a few grams by going with an 1103 motor, something that's similar in kV. And another thing, these motors do get quite warm. They're working pretty hard spinning these little tiny props. I don't think it's quite a matter of not having the torque. It's just that these motors are working hard to create the rotation that we have. And when we get to the flight footage, when I take off, notice right away how quickly it sags just getting up off the ground. I think that's very important to note because the batteries I'm using are not this guy. Like I said, this guy is going to result in brownouts, so don't use... You could try it, but unless they start shipping with different batteries than these, this isn't going to get you anywhere. So I've been using some batteries, or my LiPo batteries that are pretty tried and true, and the motors would get hot and it would sag right away. As soon as you get off the ground, you would see a battery sag, and that's pretty unusual for those batteries, so that tells me the vehicle's working pretty hard to get off the ground. We might have a bearing issue in these motors that make them a little less easier to spin. I'm not certain, but one thing's for sure is this thing is a battery killer. Your flight time is going to be relatively short, going to be about 2 minutes. I had a whole bunch of crashes, but I didn't really have any issues. Oddly enough, this turned up missing after, well, I was still doing some tuning, and so my flight wasn't very aggressive at all. But anyways, it came flying off, and the LED over here doesn't work at all, and this one barely works. I don't know if this LED panel they bought is just got a quality control issue, but that wasn't a serious issue if that is of value to you. And a buzzer is important on these tiny little micros. I do like the ears on top. We've seen this a few times before because it does help to protect our antenna. You can see mine's a bit muddy. It did come down hard a few times. I think they need to probably, I've said this in the last video, I'll probably continue to say this, they need to stop using such small gauge wire and JSTs. I do think XT30s are the future, or at least in the short run. Having JSTs is fine. We used to do that a lot before we had XT30s. And it's a little bit problematic if you're building because you have to have a crimper. That's another $30+ investment. So I do think using XT30s is probably going to be what we're going to see more and more on more models, and it allows us to push more amperage to our components, and it could likely reduce these brownouts that we see. One thing I'm going to note about the XT30s. I'm going to bring this up here, but it's not so much about this vehicle, but I think it's very important to note this, because we're going to see, I believe, a lot more vehicles with XT30s, and we're going to see a lot more battery options with XT30s. We've already got a fair bit of XT30 battery options, but so we have our plus and our minus. This is rounded, this is flat. It would normally go together just like that. It goes together nice and easy. But one thing you need to note is it does go together without a whole lot of fuss the wrong way around. It didn't take a whole lot to do that. This plastic is so thin around these outside edges that it will flex and bend and allow you to get something in there that you shouldn't. Now, of course, you know, I did have to work at it a bit to get it in there. It wasn't nearly as easy, but I think it's a good idea when you're running XT30s to make sure you line up your battery wires and press that sucker together, because otherwise you end up with something like that, and that will result in sadness. You'll probably hear this in a few more videos. You could try to get more flight time by flying bigger and bigger and heavier batteries, but I think you're probably going to want to stay around 500, even 450 in order to reduce the weight, because again, this is overmotored, underpropped. It does fly relatively well when you're in the air. It's just your flight times are going to be, in my case, my flight times were about 1:45. And that was being conservative every once in a while and kind of getting off the throttle and let the battery recover a little bit. If you go hard all the time, your battery's going to sag and be pretty angry at you. I think if they wanted to revisit this, they need to go with 1103 or 1102 motors and then switch out the JST for an XT30 and higher gauge wire. That's all I have to say about this. It comes in at under $100, so it's not terribly expensive. I do wish it had a little bit better flight times, and I think, well, in my case, I wish that component would have stayed together a little bit better. If you have any comments or questions, please leave those in the section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.